I love the balance of studio versus outdoors. Like being able to take jobs in the studio and then being able to take jobs outdoors. Like one week you could be like, setting ice screws and climbing a mountain and getting your butt kicked, and then the next week you're like in the studio photographing some product for e-com, and you're in two completely different environments, and they're both just as challenging.
Welcome to episode 1 of Creator Chats, where we sit down with creative professionals, people doing what they love for a living, learning how they got into it, industry insights, and tips for you, the viewer. Today, we're sitting down with super talented photographer and close friend, Colton Jacobs, to see how he got into photography, what industry insights he has, and how he balances both doing outdoor creative work and in-studio work. Let's hop in.
I'd say I probably got into photography the same reason a lot of people do. I was spending a lot of times outdoors and climbing and backpacking and I was getting into a lot of the sports that I photograph now at the same time as getting into photography. I was getting into splitboarding, getting into mountaineering, spending a lot more time in the mountains. And I think that was right around the time social media was also making kind of a big blow up. So I would definitely attribute a lot of it to just like wanting to take a good photo to show my family or my friends. And I started on just like point and shoots, like small cameras or iPhones or whatever. And then it just kind of gradually grew. But I was working at K2 at the time. And so my friends and people started noticing, and I ended up starting to share photos that I was taking because I was working in engineering, and like the marketing team would want to use photos occasionally or would ask to use them for social media or whatever like that. And so I got to see like behind the curtain of how like photographers work, because I was getting to like I could see how photos would be placed or how they would get shot. And so that was kind of like a much steeper learning curve because I could see it. And so I think that was kind of my intro. I ended up actually getting fired from K2. No hard feelings because they're still all my friends. But that was probably the best thing that ever happened because I got fired from engineering. And then that actually started my relationship with them as a photographer and a bunch of other companies. But like getting, fired was the best thing that ever happened because I just got launched into trying to make photography a full-time thing. And, it took a long time. But they backed me from day one, whether or not they shouldn't have. I mean, I knew nothing, but I shot for them and still do a lot. Learned so much since then, but the opportunity they gave me was the foot in the door. I probably wouldn't be where I'm at without them backing me.
Was there anything that was really hard when you were first starting out? Did you end up going straight in photography after that?
I mean, I had side jobs. I worked doing odds and ends stuff. I mean, it's said all the time, but like it's who you know. And so like being involved in the outdoors and like being at an outdoor brand, you had friends, kind of like you made friends among the industry, and that helps is, incredible, because the more people you know in the industry, the more you get hired by your friends ultimately. The hard part, it took a long time. It took, 5 or 6 years to get to a point where I feel like I was even making a career of it. It's hard to get enough clients and get established.
During that time, were you working odds and end jobs during that whole 5-year period?
I think for the first 3 years, I was doing odds and ends stuff, just random stuff at the same time. But probably been the last 6 years of 100% full time.
Were there specific photographers that were a big influence on you? Any mentors?
A friend of both of ours, Jason Hummel, was a huge mentor, still is, but more in the adventure aspect. He was more like beyond the camera. This is what you need to know for, weather windows and conditions and the gear, everything there is to learning like adventure photography. I think Jason has just such a resume that he shared a lot of his experience, and I learned a lot from him, his photos, his books, his writings. I also had a mentor. He was a friend who I worked for in a studio. I didn't work for him long, but he definitely taught me a lot in the studio, Jim, and still does whenever I have a question. He helps me.
I know that you do a lot of photography both in the studio and in the field. Is there a big difference with shooting with lights versus not, or shooting in the studio, or like making an outdoor studio?
I love the balance of studio versus outdoors. Like being able to take jobs in the studio and then being able to take jobs outdoors. Like one week you could be like, setting ice screws and climbing a mountain and getting your butt kicked. And then the next week you're like in the studio photographing some product for e-com, and you're in two completely different environments, and they're both just as challenging. I love it because I get to like bounce between these two worlds and find a balance.
When you're in the elements or you're outside shooting, it's really fun, really challenging, especially if you can bring lights out there. It's really cool to be able to shoot out there, but you're always dependent on the weather. And it kind of really puts a damper on certain things.
Yeah, if the sun's gone, what are you going to do?
Yeah, versus a studio, you have complete control.
Yeah. I think my favorite, for me personally, my favorite photography, my favorite like images created right now that I find the most inspiration from are the environmental, either portraits or some,
like an outdoor studio.
Basically, yeah. I mean, you see that a lot in my work right now. I'll try and create an outdoor studio in all sorts of different elements, and I think that's for me the most satisfying at the moment. I find that really enjoyable to take some sort of like shape the environment and the light in some small way and take that outdoors, whether it's for a portrait or action sports or what.
Why do you think that is? Is it like the specific lighting, or is it having more control?
I think it's more control. I think it's more of like a collaborative effort. Like if you're in a team environment and you've got a whole team collaborating and working together to create one specific image, it feels like you're creating something or crafting something that's much more meaningful, because you all kind of like, you're tweaking it and you're creating this thing that you see in your mind. Like you can imagine it or you envision it, you know how you kind of want it, and you're using all of the tools at your disposal to create that one image. And it's lights, it's lenses, it's cameras, it's the environment, it's your skills to get to the environment. Like if you're up on a glacier and you're roped up, like you have to have the skills to get there, and then you have to have the ability to get there, and then you have to have the skills to use the gear, and then like you're using all of your skills to create this one image, opposed to just being in the right place at the right time, which is also incredibly satisfying when it happens. It's just like this tremendous experience. But that's like, that's literally once in a lifetime moments. Like I've got photos that are literally going to only happen once in a lifetime, because I was at the right place at the right time. I mean, I could get to the same spot again, but the elements aren't going to line up again. But when you can compose an image and take all your tools and all your knowledge and to create like something, that's just as special.
How do you assemble your crew? Or like, who is on a typical shoot? Like, how many people do you have as a team or are involved in this process typically?
I mean, it totally depends on the client and who came to you. I mean, if it's an agency, then there's the agency and the client. The client's usually, you could have the art director and the marketing manager and the producer. The agency's got their own, those same people. You're going to have an assistant, and usually there's a videographer and their assistant. There could be gaffers, stylists, hair and makeup. I mean, it could be anywhere from just, in the outdoor industry, there's a lot of lower budget, like photojournalistic approach to like a sport. And that's you're literally just commissioned to go chase an athlete and document them doing what they do best. Obviously there's no hair and makeup on that. There's no craft services. There's no,
just capturing it as it goes.
You are all of that in one, which is rewarding and also difficult in its own world. And then other shoots, you've got a whole RV full of production crew where there's everyone you can think of on set. And that's also difficult because everyone gets in the way. But you have this collaborative team effort, and everyone does what they do well, very well. So if everyone just does their job well, usually you're creating a really strong work. It just is slower.
And now you have pretty much your own production vehicle now with the Scout Camper.
I do. Yes.
Yeah. How has that changed
It's a good plug.
How has that changed your creative process, or just like what you can accomplish? Has it changed it much?
It has. It's much easier to just pack everything up into like this mobile office and then just go to a location and set up and like have everything you need in a safe, dry, warm environment. Most shoots that I'm working on are out far from the city on on location somewhere. So it's nice to have, you know, all of your gear in a very organized space. Most of our shoots are weird times of the day too. So to be there the night before or to be able to stay at the trailhead the night after is pretty nice.
Especially if there's inclement weather at all. I know the first shoot, like right after you got the scout camper, we were shooting that night snowshoe shoot. That was a pretty crazy concept shoot.
That's a shoot that I look back on that like was like an ultra success this year. And there's so many pieces that went well into that. There was like really unique vision and art direction that I worked with the client. We like tossed a lot of photos and ideas back and forth to each other, ultimately stuck on one. And then we knew like, okay, this is what we're going for. This is the goal. And we're not going for quantity, we're going for quality. And so, yeah, those photos were super strong because we had a clear direction and we weren't trying to bite off too much. We knew exactly what we wanted. And there was enough, we had good assistance and good models and good direction and all this stuff. And then, I mean, it was up at the ski resort and it was dumping snow, which was the goal. I mean, we needed it to be snowing. And we had strobes and lights and all of this camera gear in the middle of the night up at the resort in the parking lot. And so the camper was like, crucial because we had charging batteries and lights plugged into the truck itself and all this stuff. And without the camper, I mean, everything would have been soaking wet. And it was like we were changing wardrobe changes in there. So that, I mean, it's invaluable in a situation like that for sure.
Mm-hmm. If you can narrow it down to one, like what is the most challenging photo shoot you've been on and what were the key takeaways from something like that?
I think the most challenging photo shoot I've ever been on would be any day where I'm chasing Stratton in the mountains. Stratton Matson is a split board athlete that's a friend of mine. I photographed his project for Patagonia, the Bike to Board, where he biked from Mammoth or the Eastern Sierra all the way to Mount Baker. That was one of the most rewarding projects because it was a long project. It was not mine, it was his. I was just the photographer for it. But I spent something like 30 nights out in the field chasing him. His project was like 3 months long, but he is a super freak athlete. And to chase him with camera gear and all of the stuff that I need, I mean, it's like an impossible task unless he slows down, which he would for me. But that's challenging just because you are in the elements trying to create strong work while also allowing this athlete to accomplish a goal that they're trying to do. You're kind of just observing it and photographing it. There's different shoots where the goal is to create imagery for a campaign or a project. And then there's this where I was just there to photograph his accomplishments. And so it wasn't my place to like slow him down or get in the way. So I just had to be there to document it. That was at times very challenging at altitude in the mountains at times.
So you're trying to keep up with this professional athlete with all your camera gear, not slowing him down, and still capturing all the things. So what's that all entail? Like, what are some learning lessons that you can take away from something like that? I know we both have shot with athletes in the mountains all the time.
Yeah.
And it's always crazy challenging because not only do you have to keep up with them and do the same objective for the most part, but you're
handicapped with
a lot of gear. And you're also, to get the shots, it means you have to be stopping. So you need to be almost leapfrogging, at least in my experience, leapfrogging them the whole time. So you're going from like dead calm, take the photo or video or whatever you're doing, sprinting, maxing out your heart rate, trying to get ahead of them just to stop again. And you're doing that over and over throughout the day. And they're just going. So do you have any tips to accomplish something like that?
Have good radios so you can yell at them to tell them to slow down because they're beyond talking distance.
That's definitely, I think, a must that you have to have on every shoot.
You have to have radios, but I use mine a lot to be like, slow down, wait for me, or stop there because like you can be like packing up your gear and be like, oh my gosh, they're like at this perfect silhouette on the ridge line. That's actually really cool.
Yeah.
That only happened because they're so fast and you're so slow or whatever. And so
And you
like,
wouldn't be able to get those shots if you didn't have a radio to be able to.
yeah, exactly. So our radios, whether or not you're a photographer, I think you should have a radio in the mountains.
Radio and good communication, because
Yeah.
sometimes the radios go out of signal, but you need to have really good game plan going into it.
Mm-hmm.
And also, if for some reason the radios die, they get cold, the batteries die, like having other means of communicating with your athletes.
That would be helpful. I'm not sure what other means you'd have besides line of sight.
Cell service is awesome if you have it. I feel like a lot of times where we are, there's no cell service.
Yeah.
But I've done it with other athletes, like giving it a timeline, like where you're skiing down a mountain, you don't have radios, or it's like you're on your way out and you're trying to just get a few extra shots, and setting up a timer on your phone, like both of you at the same time, like 3, 2, 1, synchronize your timer, and having to be like 5 minutes out, go set up the shot that you already had envisioned going down, and then just like watching your timer
waiting for
and
them.
then hoping that
They're watching it
everything's going.
I usually would just be like, oh, give me 90 seconds, and then you drop.
Yeah, a little faster with photo then.
A little bit faster with photo. But yeah, our key, I mean, you nailed it when you said that like there's so much leapfrogging of maxing out your heart rate. I mean, that's
2
like
years.
that's the single hardest challenge right there.
Always making sure you bring enough snacks. I don't know about you, but
gosh.
because you're doing that leapfrog, that you just need to be like constantly eating.
For me, I'll have a potion of electrolytes and caffeine goo.
Like the double shot espresso goo.
The double shot espresso goo,
The-
125 milligrams of caffeine.
Brings you back from the dead right there.
I call it the like a full body override, I think is what I called it. Because like when you're like at altitude and you're just like totally bonking and like you need to like either keep pushing to the summit or whatever it is, like to have something like that is like, it's not even like, that's not even like a luxury. That's almost like mandatory. Like to have something like that to dig you out of a hole. That's pretty important piece to have in the backpack.
I think it's important to have that for yourself, and also having a few extra goos, shot blocks,
To dish out.
especially to athletes, assistants, anybody else that is bonking on a shoot, because when you're out there, you're already so committed to getting whatever you are doing done, and just like getting back to the car safely, having the extra supplies
Yeah.
to do that, which leads, I think, perfectly into like communication when you're in the mountains and shooting in these more extreme environments is probably the most important aspect of it. Like having clear communication on what everybody's comfortable with doing,
For sure.
especially with the athletes. Like some athletes have a way higher risk tolerance than I do. So how do you manage that with the people you're working with? Like communication skills, do you have
Well, I think
things you go over before you even leave the trailhead?
making sure everyone's competent with their gear, talking about the conditions before you even go out there, observations, reading the avalanche forecasts, and then when you're on the trail, everyone just like talking about what they're observing, what they're comfortable with. I mean, communication is everything when it comes to being safe in the mountains. And that's kind of like cliche to say, but it truly is. I mean,
We just went through this on our last trip when we went up Shuckson together.
Yeah.
It was like every single aspect of the entire shoot was like step by step. Can we even make it past this section? And being okay with turning around, like making the most of whatever you can get and not pushing past that line of safety that wouldn't get you back to the car.
yeah,
safely.
and a lot of times on like rock and scrambling and stuff like that, like I think a lot of people forget that like coming down is harder than going up, so you can get yourself stuck in some situations too with if you're just scrambling and you can't rappel.
And the summit's only halfway too.
Yeah, the summit's only halfway, so if you having a turnaround time is pretty important. There's a lot of mountains and a lot of like peaks we're coming around here. It's like it's not like it's this big far off like 8,000 meter peak. Like it really like you don't necessarily have to have a turnaround time, but you need to know that the summit is halfway, because like you can run out of steam and energy and food, and then you're just a team of miserable people coming down off the mountain. And you can make bad decisions for sure if you're hungry and thirsty and tired and just over it. So it all depends on like the type of terrain you're traveling through. Having a turnaround time is probably way more important if the terrain is very difficult and you need to be fully there.
I think that also is a really good point is as a creator in these environments, like you need to first be comfortable in the environment by itself, doing whatever you're doing. And then adding the complexity of photography or video work there, like adds so much more to your brain. Like you need to be so comfortable in that environment
Yeah.
and have all your systems so dialed beforehand that it's not even a thought like on doing the systems. Like, you know those like the back of your hand. So then you can actually focus on the creative, because otherwise you're cruxing the whole time.
Watching you, like with rope work, watching you was like the epitome of that. Like my rope work game is not nearly like what yours is. And like to be able to watch you just take over and to handle the rope work on that expedition was impressive, because you were so tapped out on bandwidth when it comes to like, you're thinking 2 steps ahead of what's the next shot, what's the conditions doing, what's the light doing, where are the where are the models, what are they wearing, do we need a wardrobe change, and then also being competent with the gear and your surroundings. Like you only have so much bandwidth ability to like multitask, so you can't fake it really. Like you have to be an athlete or a student of the sport in order to photograph it. It's really hard to cheat it. Otherwise you're going to make mistakes.
And knowing you as somebody that comes from more of being an athlete before you even got into photography, how has that shaped your photography and your style?
Yeah, I think you photograph a sport a lot more true to the user or athlete's perspective when you yourself are actually a doer or athlete of the sport. And also your relationship with your athletes, if you're, as the photographer, your relationship with them is kind of on a different level, because you can talk about the way you would ride a line or the way you'd hit a jump or the way you would do something a little bit more comfortably, because you could, in some cases, just put down the camera and do it yourself too. So to be able to have that sort of like open communication with an athlete is nice. I mean, it's fun to be able to just like both see the terrain in the same way. You photograph the sport in a way that you would want to see it as an athlete as well. So I think that definitely helps.
I know we've got you in front of the camera quite a few times, mostly with your camera bag on. Do you plan on being in front of the lens instead of behind it a lot more this upcoming winter?
That would be fun. I've tried to make that plug before. I've tried to...
The athlete photographer plug?
Yeah, that would be, if anyone out there wants to make a video of that would be awesome. I want to have like a full part of like riding with my camera pack. That would be hilarious. But no, not yet. I don't have any plans like that. I think it's important to ditch the camera pack and ride just to ride a lot. I didn't do that as much early in my career because I felt like every moment needed to be photographed. I was at the resort and it was like an epic powder day. I was like, I can't not have my camera. You lose the love of the sport if the only time you do that sport is with a camera pack or with an eye of like watching other people do it. You stop wanting to go to the mountain on powder days if you don't have an athlete to photograph, which is like the saddest thing ever. So to be able to just ditch the camera pack, ditch all the weight and go ride like you used to, like you did when you fell in love with it. For me, that's the best days. Like I don't miss the camera anymore on deep powder days. Sure, there's moments where I'm like, watch my friend ride and I'm like, wow, that would have made a really good photo, but I took an iPhone video and whatever. It's fun. Like it's better to just be like here in the moment with you. Those days you have to have that. I mean, I didn't get it at first too, because I have photographer friends that are experienced and, they were well into their career and like they would travel and they would do things and they would not have a camera and they wouldn't even touch up a camera or they wouldn't even care. And it was so confusing to me. But then now that I'm at where I'm at now, I'm like, I don't want a camera in my hand any more than I have to most of the time. it's important for just you and your love of the sport to keep it fresh.
Yeah, having a balance. So does that mean do you still do photography for fun, or is it almost all for work now?
That's a fantastic question. And the truth is I don't shoot as much for fun as I used to. And that's a little sad. There's passion projects that I'll photograph and like ideas, and those are fulfilling, but it's still a means of growing my portfolio, which is a form of my work. Thankfully, my work is fun. I have fun creating images, even if it's for work, for a job. So in that regard, like, my work is fun and my fun is work. So do I go out and shoot photos just for fun? Probably still yes, but not as much as I'd like to admit, probably.
So I know for myself, creating these passion projects has had such a huge influence on the work that I want to do, the work that I get hired for, and just like my style. How important do you think passion projects are for yourself, and how has that shaped your career?
I think passion projects are invaluable. You have to shoot for, I wouldn't say free, but you have to go shoot whether like some projects, whether or not you're getting paid for it. The challenges is knowing when it's appropriate. When is it the time to be like, I'm going to put all the budget or all the money that I have for this project into just making the project as good as possible, because I know it's a portfolio project that will get me more work, or that I want this to be, a fundamental portfolio piece. You're never going to get hired for work that you've never done. So if you want to be into automotive photography, you're going to have to go start somewhere. No one's going to hire you to go shoot a Toyota campaign if you've never shot a car. I think a passion project that is worth it to me involves a creative vision with like true unique concept. I think concept is the big one here. Concept is the word that I feel like is important with a passion project or any project.
I think a passion project, at least for myself, has to push me creatively to do something that I've never done before.
Yes.
Or the concept has to be so appealing or like so moving that I have to create it, whether or not I'm getting paid for it or not, or even if I have to spend my own money to do it. Like something that you're so passionate about that you just have to get it done.
Yeah, those are good parameters. I mean, I would 100. You said it well. A passion project needs to push your skills. You need to be learning, forcing yourself to learn, or creating something that you haven't created before, or expanding upon a portfolio that you're trying to like grow. And I think some of the strongest projects that in work that I've created were probably passion projects. And the common thread is that they had a concept. And I think the snowshoe shoot, for instance, it didn't make sense, but it didn't matter. It showed a concept. It showed follow through. We had an idea and we executed it well. And I think for like a good passion project, you need to have an idea. You need to know exactly what it is, and you need to execute it well. And I think people value and people respect, even if it doesn't make sense, even if it's not something that they like or it even is appealing to them. I think people respect when you follow through and execute a concept. It shows that you know what you're doing. And I think that's important too. I mean, especially look at like fashion photography. No fashion photography makes sense.
None of it.
None of it makes sense. But it's well executed concepts. I think that's a fun twist to bring into photography, especially commercial photography, is some sort of a twist that doesn't make sense, some sort of shock value or splash value. I like to say splash value, but when that photo that doesn't really make sense, but it's done well, I guess you stop, you look at it, and you're like, whoa, that's kind of weird, but it's cool. And I think if you can introduce a little bit of shock value to your concept, it is valuable or worth it.
For sure. I think rewinding a second, when is a good time to choose to do free work versus not free work? Like, I think one good rule of thumb on that is don't do free work unless it's pushing you creatively.
Or you need that gear. For me personally, like in the growing of my career, like when I got I would do free. I guess I guess that's a little bit different. That's like product
Doing like
trade.
a work trade.
Doing
Yeah.
a work trade. Like I would say, like don't do work trades unless, of course, like you need that piece of gear. But if you already have it, then don't do it.
You can't live off of gear, guys.
You can't live off of gear. No, I mean
Gear does not pay the bills.
And it's like really hard to just flip a bunch of product on eBay.
It's true. How do you handle creative blocks?
I like to joke that I'm an idea factory for fun projects, but it's not necessarily like creative. Like the funnest thing in the world is to like find some client to pay for you and your friend's adventure. But that's not necessarily a creative project. That's just you
having a fun adventure,
cheating the system, finding someone to pay for you and your friends to go skiing or mountain biking or something. I think when I get like super stacked with a bunch of work back to back to back to back, like you don't allow yourself time to be creative because you're so busy with projects. And I think it's okay, this is going to sound maybe a little strange, but like if you are bidding jobs too cheap and you're stacking jobs too close to each other, then you're not allowing yourself time to really follow through with making each project to the best of your ability. And that means like pre-production and scouting, the creative side of setting yourself up for the project to be creative. But if you were to bid them a little bit more appropriately priced, to allow yourself to not have to take jobs back to back to back or like so stacked schedule to where you're allowed to give yourself time to do the proper pre-production, not try and shoot too much in one day, and then editing, spend the right time amount on editing. That is very helpful with avoiding creative block, because if you just, all you're doing is shooting and editing just to get it turned around to the client, you're not really being that creative. You're just being safe, and creativity isn't safe.
I think it's a very common trap to get caught in, where you're just constantly creating, especially if you have paid work back to back to back to back, where it's just, you're always doing kind of the safe route on it because that's the only way to get it done. You can't go and try a crazy edit. You can't try a crazy concept because that takes too much time away from, especially if it's a lower budget, you don't have extra time to do anything else. Like you need to, at least for myself, I need to set time aside just to be creative, like time just to think, not be creating, but be creative.
Where's your most creative time? Like for you, when are you the most creative?
I draw my inspiration and my creativity from a few different places. I enjoy consuming a lot of different types of media, typically types of commercials or films, getting a lot of inspiration from that. But then I am creative after I like consume a lot, and then I don't consume anything for a while. I'll go on like long walks, trail runs. I'd say long walks and trail runs are probably the biggest inspiration. And then also just like clearing my mind and having not consuming any media at like this, probably the last couple hours of a day. And it's crazy, like before I go to bed, if I hadn't been on TV or consuming any outside media, I'll get so many ideas in like the last hour of the day.
Wow.
But I can't be consuming or creating during that time.
I don't think I've ever not consumed media for a long enough period to let my mind go to work.
I think the easiest hack for that though is like for me, like going on a run.
That's it for me. It's runs. When I'm running, I hate running, but when I'm running, everything comes to me. Or like things that I like solve problems or like I figure out the solution to issues, or I think of a creative way to shoot something while I'm running, or in the shower, or in the hot tub. I need like waterproof pencil and paper for the shower wall.
Right in the rain.
What's right in the rain?
It's waterproof journals.
There we go. Aren't iPhones waterproof?
iPhones are waterproof, but the touchscreen doesn't work very well.
That's true.
I guess during your runs, are you listening to music? Are you listening to podcasts? Are you listening to any of that?
I'm not listening to podcasts.
Yeah.
When I'm running. I don't think so. I only listen to podcasts when I'm like driving. I listen to music when I run. Yeah. Yeah. And I don't have a problem being getting into a creative mindset. I don't run to get into a creative mindset, but it is what happens and I enjoy it. I find that when I'm hiking or backpacking or climbing, I also enter that space But I'm with people and I'm usually chatting and talking when I'm hiking or biking. But when I'm running, I'm usually by myself. And then I'm just purely just thinking.
So it's that solitude that really
Yeah.
does it
And
for
I
you.
hate being alone. Like I am an extrovert to the death of me. So the literal only time that I am alone is if I'm in the shower or I'm running. It's literally the only time that's the only time I can think clearly.
Do you ever have times where you just sit down to try to brainstorm ideas?
Never. Never.
Oh my gosh. I had this camera in there the whole time.
I couldn't even see it.
Is there any advice you would give to up and coming photographers, anybody in content creation really? Photo, video side, either one.
Yes. I feel like suddenly my mind went blank because like I get asked this so much on Instagram, and I'm more than happy to share. Like I would say there's a few, like it's said all the time. It's not about the gear. It really isn't. It's about like a fresh perspective, fresh eye, being creative, finding where you can be creative and just kind of like let that out or, execute that idea. Even if it's not like, I feel like it could be helpful to just like recreate things that you found. Like even it's not your original idea. It's probably not that person's original idea either, but like to recreate something helps you learn.
Just the act of recreating, you can
Yeah,
never recreate something perfectly.
Right, and
So
you
it's
learn.
always going to have your spin on
And
it.
you learn. Don't worry about your own individual style because it will come. I think I stressed a lot early on about like, oh, I have to have my style. What's going to be my style, my tones and my edits or my, what is it? I'm like, you just shoot long enough and it will be, people will tell you like, oh, I know that's your style. And like, didn't necessarily try, or maybe I tried, but I have friends that I could be on Instagram and I would stop with, if you could take all the names away, I could tell whose photos are whose because their style. And I think your style will come to you. Just keep shooting, keep practicing. And another piece of advice would be, don't be afraid to like go assist for some photographers that inspire you. Like go learn from them. I'm sure they'll be happy to hire you to be an assistant. To be able to help someone and to see how they do it is that'll expedite your learning process. So to be able to do I wish I did that more early on. And I still would if someone asked me to, like I volunteer to help my friends on projects. I'll be a AC on a shoot, even though I have no interest in shooting video. But I know one thing you do, a piece of advice that you've really inspired me is like learning. Like I didn't pay to go to film school or photography school or art school or whatever, wherever people go to learn. I just like practiced a lot, which whether or not that was faster route, I don't know. But I definitely had real world experience and like learning, whether it's masterclass or what, like that can be super helpful. Like you can learn new techniques or be inspired to try things differently, to look at editing or look at composing or look at the way you do pre-production differently. If you like pay the $500 for a class, or if there's a workshop of a photographer that you really love, pay the $2,000 to go be in their workshop because it will probably pay off in the long run. Because
you expedite it and you just cut out so much of that trial and error and wasted time. Like how much would you pay to get back potentially years of your life?
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to say it. And I think that's undervalued resource because everyone goes to YouTube, but like pay for classes and treat it like school a little bit and learn.
Don't be scared to be a beginner, like coming at things with a beginner mindset.
Yeah.
Being okay with failing when you're first starting out.
Oh yeah.
Is the best way to learn. Like
that's
trial and error and actually applying what you're learning.
Being afraid to fail is like the worst thing that you could do. Like that is how you learn. And if you're afraid to fail at something, then you're never ever gonna get anywhere.
If you don't try, you fail by default.
Yeah. What is your advice to someone early on? I mean, I feel like there's so much advice that I could give. I can't think of it all right now.
Yeah, I would say learn as much as you can. And the only way to really learn is by doing, though. Like
Right.
you have to learn and then apply that learning so it actually becomes knowledge and is useful. If you can learn all you want, but if you don't apply it, it's just wasted time, really. So I'd say that, and then finding mentors, like finding anybody in the industry, like whatever you want to do, like finding people that have already done it and learning from them. Like that expedites your learning and gets you ahead so much faster.
That reminded me of another piece of advice, that asking for critique, have someone critique your work, asking for someone that you know, it could be someone who's not even a photographer, but because you could get like an outside perspective of a, you know, a consumer's point of view, maybe of like, but you know, if you could get a photographer that you respect to critique your work, or
be open to that critique too, like be open to
Oh,
that criticism.
yeah, absolutely.
It's really hard sometimes to take that without taking it personally, but it's really
I like
the best way to
to
get better.
I like to ask clients after a job, ask for feedback. What could I have done better? Or maybe not phrase it that way, but you know what I mean? Like ask them if, you know, next time I'd really love to, you know, continue this relationship. Hopefully we work together again. How do you think this went? Is there anything I could do better for next time? I've had some pretty good feedback from clients that way. Shows openness, good communication. I mean, good communication would fix all the problems in the world.
I feel like that's been the key takeaway about
communication.
This whole thing, having
Yeah.
good communication with clients, with talent,
Yeah.
with other people that you're on a production with,
Yeah.
on crew.
Yeah. Speaking of communication, another thing that reminded me of is I've been on shoots before where the client hired models. The models don't even know what the shoot is about or what it's for. That's often overlooked, is communicating with the models what the shoot is even about or what we're doing.
What's the purpose?
What's the purpose? They'll just show up and be, you know, think they're just standing there when it could be like a trail running shoot.
Really?
Yeah, that's definitely happened.
That's
I mean,
tough.
they were hired because their portfolio probably had athletic photos, but models actually told me that in person one time, because I asked a group of models that we're on a shoot with, and I was like, hey, as a photographer, what could I do better? Or like, and they all agreed, like, we rarely get the shot list shared with us or the creative brief shared with them, which seems like an oversight, but I also can see how it could be overseen. That helps because then they know how to get ready for it or how to, you know, obviously there's a point where they figure out what they're modeling because you're making them do it, but that's a good one. Another form of communication that's often overlooked.
All right. Well, that was great. What do you have, I guess, closing remarks? Like, what are you looking forward to, and what's in the future for you?
I don't know how to answer that question. Honestly. Everything's so like unpredictable with this career. Like there's always so like you could get thrown a crazy job like last minute and it can be like the funnest job ever, but having a little break right now.
Thanks for having me over. Recording probably going to be episode 1. We'll
Episode 1.
See when this actually comes out.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Setting up a studio in my living room.
Peace out, everybody. Hopefully this camera over here wasn't too distracting for most of the podcast. So you couldn't see it unless I leaned back.
That's not that bad.
All right, we're done. That's a wrap.